2020. It was the year that kept on giving, even when we told it to stop. Although many people in the world were wishing that back in 2019 the world just had a stroke and turned straight to 2021, I believe that we as F1 fans have a lot to be thankful for. 2020 was already set to be one of the craziest in F1 history, with it being the final year of the current regulations, and with doubts hanging over the futures of many drivers. And right from pre-season testing, it seemed like we were in for a banger of a season. So did 2020 live up to what we thought it would be? Allow me to take you all on a trip through time from the 1st of January to the 31st of December, not just in the F1 world, but in the world as a whole.
Yeah, I pull up in a Escalade, I can hear what you say. Shawty so bad, I pull up on my worst days. I can never mistake a Honda from a Mercedes.
2020 began, like many years do, on the 1st of January. Not much really happened in the world in January, except the USA trying to accuse Donald Trump of abusing his power. Yeah, no shit. And China busy trying to fight off a new virus, while the UK was just busy trying to fight off Angela Merkel for another Brexit extension. Most F1 teams were hard at work trying to develop the best car they could for the final year of the regulations. Meanwhile, Ferrari were busy doing science experiments to see how little power they could get out of an F1 car. So we kissed goodbye to January, and I turned the page of my golden retriever calendar to reveal the month of February. And with it, we welcomed the 2020 F1 season for real, with most of the teams revealing a brand new livery and Ferrari revealing an excellent dance routine they'd been working on instead of their 2020 car. On a more personal note, February was the month in which I started this channel, so I do just want to take a moment to thank you all for watching, commenting, liking, and subscribing. To think that I'd have over 20,000 people who actually care what I have to say is mental. I mean, I'm coming from a place where clips of me talking are used to sedate wild animals, so it's quite literally a world of difference. As well as this, February brought around pre-season testing. 2 weeks where the F1 teams can make sure that Catalonia is still the worst race on the calendar, and also make sure that their cars are still working. For many teams, this wasn't too much of an issue, as their cars were just evolutions of their designs from the previous year, but both Red Bull and Racing Point were running some pretty dramatic changes to their cars. Racing Point's car wasn't exactly a unique concept, as it bore basically every possible semblance to the 2019 Mercedes car, including the speed at which it could lap the track, which prompted a lot of fans to question the legality of their so-called design, while the FIA started desperately rewriting their 2021 rulebook to make sure this couldn't happen again. Red Bull's, on the other hand, wasn't nearly as divisive, but nonetheless, it was a very different looking car to their 2019 one. While the F1 circus was packing up for the long trip to Melbourne for the season opener in March, the world was getting wind of a new virus that had originated in a place called Wuhan in China, with cases being reported all over the world, although it seemed like it was nothing to be worried about. It was just a bad cold, right? March was, whether you're an F1 fan or not, easily the worst month of 2020. The newly christened COVID-19 virus had hit the world like a steam train, and the world leaders had no choice but to put their countries into lockdown. Well, everyone except for Donald Trump, who instead suggested that we all drink bleach or something, I don't know. Personally, I prefer eating Tide Pods, but you know, each to their own, eh? So with the world in turmoil, there wasn't much else to be excited for but the first F1 race of 2020. But little did we know.
After much confusion, the Formula One Grand Prix in Melbourne has been officially cancelled.
Well, that's it. Time to follow Trump's advice then. So with basically all sports cancelled and only 1 hour of exercise permitted per day, you won't be surprised to learn that half the UK simultaneously took up exercising immediately outside my house. How strange. Nothing really seemed to happen between April and June in the world, with most people being chained to their desks at home and forced to work, while all Ferrari employees were taking a hard-earned bit of time off. After all, making a car this slow is tiring work. They say that time flies when you're having fun, and I don't disagree with that, but can someone please explain to me why time flew while I was forced to work from a computer which works slower than that sloth thing in Zootropolis? Do I enjoy being forced to wait? The world continued to disappoint all the way through to July, when suddenly things started to get a lot better for F1 fans. On the 3rd of July, F1 would be starting for real, with the season opener being a double header in Austria, followed by a round in Hungary. This was seemingly the best possible news for Red Bull, as these two tracks are the ones which favour their car the most, and if they got off on the right foot, then they could be on course to win their first world title since 2013. However, things didn't go so well for Red Bull in these races. Or rather, things went far too well for Mercedes. Round 1 in July saw the first of 15 Mercedes pole positions in 2020 taken by Valtteri Bottas, with 6-time world champion Lewis Hamilton making it Mercedes 1-2. How unpredictable. The race itself was a much more interesting ordeal than Saturday's qualifying session, despite Bottas running away to take yet another win for the Silver Arrows. The first retirement of the whole season went to one of the potential championship favourites, Max Verstappen, by virtue of his Honda engine losing the will to live in the early stages of the race. Next came Ricciardo, Stroll, Magnussen, Grosjean, Grosjean, Russell, Raikkonen, Albon and Kvyat in a series of retirements more similar to an F1 2020 Let's Play video than the top tier of motorsport. Up in the front of the field, Hamilton received a 5-second penalty for repeating the incident between himself and Albon in Brazil the previous year, meaning that he was at risk of not even finishing on the podium. Leclerc had driven a quiet race to bring it home in P2, and because of Hamilton's penalty, Lando Norris scored his first ever podium along with the fastest lap, meaning that this was McLaren's second podium in 3 races. The second round in Austria was a much less exciting affair, with Hamilton taking the pole on the win and a typical Bottas-Verstappen lineup to round out the podium, with the highlight of the race being Charles Leclerc attempting to improve the DRS system on his teammate's car. The Hungarian Grand Prix came next, and yet again Lewis Hamilton took the pole on the win to come ever closer to Michael Schumacher's record of 91 wins and 7 world championships, with Verstappen taking P2 and Bottas rounding out the podium in P3. For a race which I usually really enjoy, this was one of my least favourites this year, so let's move quickly on to August and one of my personal favourite races of the year, the British Grand Prix. On the day before FP1 of the British Grand Prix got underway, I managed to hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, courtesy of a shout out from Tomo F1, so already the weekend was off to a good start, and it wasn't even Friday yet. The British Grand Prix was a bit of a slow burner, I have to admit. I reckon I got through at least 12 cups of tea before things started to get interesting. The Pirelli rubber for the race looked to be a shaky tyre already, and when tyres started blowing up more than a doubts were raised as to whether or not some people could make it to the end of the race. The answer? No. Bottas was the first of the frontrunners to be hit by an issue when his tyre exploded, forcing him to drop down to P11 by the checkered flag. And for once in his life, Hamilton's tyres were actually gone. His front right tyre gave up hope just 1 lap later, but he proved to us all that he was still the king of tyres when he dragged the obliterated rubber to over 100 miles an hour on his way to take the checkered flag, beating out all of his rivals who all had an extra wheel at their disposal. Verstappen took the first non-Mercedes win in the second race in Britain, and once again things started to settle down again. The Spanish Grand Prix was predictably boring, so I'll just pretend that never happened and instead focus on the next race in Belgium, which I've been looking forward to all season. However, yet again, we failed to get a decent race out of it. August was also an interesting month for the UK, as Boris Johnson had the brainwave to launch the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, wherein all UK residents would get half of their meals paid for by the government, in a bid to kickstart the economy again. Although, when September hit, all the young people were apparently to blame when everyone got COVID-19. I have no idea what Boris Johnson's smoking, but I want some. Speaking of September, let's move away from summer and into autumn, starting off with the Italian Grand Prix. Or at least one of the Italian Grand Prix. This was the only race I wasn't able to watch live this season, and I'm still waiting for the full race replay to become available on F1 TV, or I fear I'll never see it. Of course, we all know what happened in the race. Well, apart from me, so I won't go into detail, but basically it played host to a first win for the AlphaTauri team since Sebastian Vettel won the Italian Grand Prix many years previously, thanks to Pierre Gasly's stunning drive in the last laps to hold off the much faster McLaren of Carlos Sainz. The next round, also in Italy, was just as exciting a race, with Verstappen crashing out in turn 2 while his teammate went on to take a maiden podium. This was also the second consecutive race we'd had a red flag, thanks to some questionable manoeuvres during the safety car restart, which caused a pile-up so big it would have given Yuji Ide an erection. The final race of September was another return to normality for us F1 fans, as it was in Sochi. While I'm by no means Sochi's biggest fan, I believe that this year's race wasn't actually that bad, even though it was the usual culprits who rounded out the podium again. On to October then, and this month was another really important one for me. Not only was this my first month of 2020 without a girlfriend, meaning I wouldn't have to buy her a Christmas present, but it was also the month in which I reached 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. The first race in October was the German Grand Prix, a race which was removed from the calendar in 2019, however it made a shock return in 2020, but at a different track, the Nürburgring. During this race, Lewis Hamilton equalled the record for the most wins in Formula 1, and Daniel Ricciardo took Renault's first podium since when they weren't even called Renault. Another star performance came from Nico Hülkenberg, who started in P20 but made his way up to P9 by the checkered flag, while filling in for Lance Stroll. This was actually Hülkenberg's second appearance in the season, as he'd also filled in for Sergio Perez at both British Grand Prix, although I'd had enough to talk about already in those races, so I left him out. Sorry, Nico. The next race was in Portugal, racing at the Algarve circuit for the first time ever, and Hamilton became the most successful F1 driver of all time in terms of wins, heading out yet another Mercedes 1-2, and with Verstappen in P3. In the third Italian Grand Prix of the season, held at the Imola circuit, Max Verstappen made it a hat-trick of DNFs in Italy, and his teammate put on another poor showing after spinning out of contention for a podium and being passed by Sergio Perez. Coincidence? On to November then, starting off with the Turkish Grand Prix, another new addition to the 2020 calendar. The Turkish Grand Prix was my personal favourite of the season, starting off with my favourite driver taking pole position. And no, I'm not taking the piss. I genuinely think Lance Stroll is a class driver. Although Stroll didn't manage to convert that pole into a win, or even a podium, I was still hooked from end to end. For Bottas, however, the Turkish Grand Prix was one to forget, as not only did he see another World Championship slip through his fingers, but he also spent half the time facing backwards in his bid to show us why he never did become a full-time rally driver. For Sebastian Vettel, it was a day to remember, as it was his first and only podium of 2020, handed to him personally by Charles Leclerc, who probably didn't even realise as he was busy having a punch-up with himself after locking up in the second-to-last corner. The next round in Bahrain was a proper shock to a lot of people, not just F1 fans. I don't need to go into detail as to what happens, but for those of you who are watching from the future and maybe aren't aware of what happened, just Google 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix and you'll get the idea. Okay, let's continue, shall we? The Sakhir Grand Prix was the first round in December and simultaneously a perfect metaphor for 2020. The laps were short, but there were a lot of them. Some people had the best race of their life. Well, mainly just Sergio Perez. Other people just wanted to move on to the next round, and 1 in 20 people got COVID-19. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix was another boring race with fireworks, and that was the end of the season. Granted, it was a very anticlimactic way to end the year, but even so, we've got a lot to be grateful for. Firstly, the F1 YouTube community has been exploding lately. I'm struggling to count how many people I've seen pass 1,000, 10,000, and even 100,000 subscribers this year. I haven't been on YouTube for a year yet, and somehow I've still got 20,000 people who enjoy my content. I mean, when I first started a YouTube channel, I was some pathetic 14-year-old who hadn't yet experienced the joy of voice breaks and facial hair. And, well, I've experienced one of them now. Next, the whole world, apart from the UK, has been able to almost beat a virus that could have wiped us out in the past. And finally, the FIA managed to put on one of the best seasons in F1 history. 16 thrilling races in the Spanish Grand Prix later, Lewis Hamilton has once again walked away with the title, but the rest of the field couldn't have been any less predictable. Well, apart from Bottas and Verstappen and Latifi. So did 2020 live up to everything it promised to be? Well, it promised to have Zandvoort, Vietnam, Monaco, Baku, Interlagos, Mexico, COTA, Japan, Singapore, Canada, France, China and Australia on the calendar, so no. But was 2020 a good year to be an F1 fan? Hell yeah, it was. Yes, 2020 has had its ups and downs. We've been in and out of lockdowns like there's no tomorrow, and many of us have lost relatives to COVID-19. But F1 has been a great source of entertainment for all of us, and it's been one of, if not the best season in F1 history. And that's why 2020 has been the best worst year in F1 history. I know I'm pretty late to the party to make a video like this, and I'm sorry about that. I've been working on this video since about November, so, I mean, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like on it to show me your appreciation. I would just like to apologise to the Tifosi about all the digs I made at Ferrari throughout the video, and to anyone else who I've offended by slating their favourite drivers. I probably did miss some important bits in my desperation to get this out on time, so, I mean, forgive me if I did, and if there's something major that I've forgotten, then just, leave a comment and I'll pin it so that everyone, including myself, can laugh at my idiocy. But yeah, thank you all for watching, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you're new. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all later.
I ain't desperate, got a death wish, Shawty wake up every morning, got a Zanny and her lettuce for breakfast. Now I gotta flex this, I don't need no hoe, but I love it when they jealous. I ain't desperate.